Well, fabulous. Welcome to you all. It's great to see many familiar faces here. This is our 2022 Research for the Public Good event, which is our internal APUS research conference. And we have had a fabulous slate of presentations all week. So if you're watching this on the recording, I hope you watch more because we've been really fortunate with all of the presenters that we've had. So I'm very happy to present this today, Jill Wingritter and Coleman Myron, who will be sharing their research project with us. And I'm very excited to learn more about what they have been working on. So I'll turn the floor over to Jill and Coleman.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny.
Coleman is going to begin, and I will share my screen. If it'll allow me. Here we go. So you can see the website. Entire screen. There we go. Okay, Coleman, let you start.
Okay. First off, the genesis of our project began with the workshops that we take, specifically APUS 222. The instructor for the course was Robert Smith, affectionately, I think, known as Smitty. Basically, in the class, it was a workshop on PTSD. And within the workshop, we discussed the symptoms of stress and PTSD and how these symptoms, quote, can manifest themselves in student behavior, unquote, in an online environment. Since our student population uniformly consists of the military and their significant others, PTSD is often associated with them, and specifically with service members who have returned from combat. PTSD, however, wasn't officially recognized until 1980 by the American Psychiatric Association. Prior to that, but even though it wasn't officially recognized then, trauma has always been a part of human life. Earlier, it was seen as hysteria. During World War I, it was shell shock. During World War II and Korean War, it was described as combat exhaustion. And during the Vietnam War, it was known as combat neurosis. Specifically, PTSD sufferers fail to lose consciousness of the traumatic event itself. And this traumatic event and its symptoms impact many individuals whom we will encounter in our classrooms and daily lives. And I wanted to just stop here, just that I apologize. I couldn't get my webcam to work. So Jill's been very gracious in showing the site. But I'm going to hand it back to Jill so she can discuss her thoughts on PTSD and the sufferers in the military.
So. All right, thank you, Coleman. Okay, so I put together this little PowerPoint. I'll pull up. Is that showing? Good. Excuse me. All right, so in addition to teaching English, which now I think I'm on year 23, I'm also a yoga teacher, and I own a yoga studio in a small town in Indiana, PA, outside of Pittsburgh. So I have met many sufferers of PTSD, and over the past 10 years, this has been like a recent trend in yoga trainings to learn how to address this, to help people suffering from PTSD. So this was an interest of mine because of both meeting students at APUS and also through my yoga practice and teaching. So it's wonderful. This project was great. I was so really grateful to have the funds and the support to do this. And I love this quote. We are including this on the website, that the wound is the place where the light enters you. That it's part of life and not something that has to be so seen as such a bad thing. It is painful and there's difficulty, but there's also healing. So this is what our discussion is about today. So we're talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and trauma. The Greek word for wound is something that more people than ever are dealing with today. It's estimated, Veterans Affairs says that about 7% of Americans will experience PTSD at some point in their lifetimes. And for veterans, the number, it just depends on the experience and where, but it's as high as 35%. There are many books that have been written over the past couple of decades, many of them about yoga and mindfulness, which is my half of this project. So one book that I consulted for my research was by Daniel Minty and Julie Staples, authors of Reclaiming Life After Trauma, Healing PTSD with Cognitive Behavioral Therapy and Yoga. So they define PTSD as a state of ongoing uneasiness expressed in our body's emotions, sense of worth, sleep patterns, and relationships. Unhealthy negative emotions like bitterness, rage, despair, feelings of worthlessness characterize PTSD. And while an initial trauma may last for just a few seconds, these unhealthy negative emotions can continue for years or indefinitely. So there's some statistics from the Department of Veterans Affairs about the percentage of veterans depending on where they were and what their experience was and how they're likely to have PTSD. And of course, it's not limited to just veterans. We have survivors of sexual abuse. A lot of research was done by Judith Herman in the 1990s. And she's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. There's also now I've been reading about CPTSD, children who are survivors of PTSD. Those survivors of war, accidents, crime, violence. And also there's this whole other area of research about inherited family trauma. Mark Wolin has been leading that up. Really interesting. So there are many, many different ways trauma can affect people. Judith Herman, I like some of her quotes because she's a realist and she doesn't pull any punches. She said that she's not just referring to sexual abuse survivors, but anyone with PTSD has experienced atrocities that refuse to be buried. And she said, remembering and telling the truth about these terrible events is a prerequisite for healing. And she warns that far too often secrecy prevails. And I know Coleman will talk about how in the military, you want to be strong, you want to put on a tough front and survive and suck it up. It's not encouraged necessarily in our culture to talk about these feelings. So it's hard to find the right path to healing. And the mindfulness, the message is to sit with our pain. That's where we start, that we sit with our pain. Yes, there's the story, but there's the pain behind it that is really driving everything. Unfortunately, it seems the Military Times reports that the VA and the Department of Defense reported that PTSD therapies such as talk therapy are not helpful for a majority of patients. They reported that 2/3 of military veterans going for therapy are not finding the help that they need, that this isn't enough. So luckily, there are supportive ways to, supplement or go along with therapy. One of them is mindfulness, and that's what we'll get into a little bit more here, that the authors of this book I was mentioning by Minty and Staples, they said that in PTSD, the nervous system gets stuck, and it's further reinforced by the mind that replays negative or painful thoughts in an endless loop, what Freud called repetition compulsion. It's a misguided attempt to fix things. But this is where mindfulness comes in, that we learn to work with the mind, to make friends with our thoughts in order to transform our thinking and heal our trauma. And that might sound a little like, oh, really, make friends with our thoughts? Well, there's more to this. Brendan Abrams, author of Teaching Trauma-Sensitive Yoga, explains that the essence of trauma is disassociation and disconnection from ourself and others. Yoga and mindfulness are about connection, self-realization, finding the truth about who we are. And in this respect, it's the polar opposite of trauma and a path toward healing. So these are age-old remedies that anyone can practice. And I remember talking with Chaplain Kyle last year, since he also specializes in helping people recover from PTSD. And he was concerned. He was like, whoa, he was cautioning me, I would be careful there and saying people can heal themselves. So as Coleman will explain, we're not medical experts and we're not saying this is the path to healing. This can help. And these are some strategies and techniques that we're offering on our website that could go along with therapy to help people ultimately heal themselves. So the practice of mindfulness and yoga, it's a reminder, and this is really key, that we are not alone, that we are not separate. And I think that's a big key that just exacerbates the symptoms of PTSD. One of the practices on our website that I'll just mention here, because I think it's so important, it's called Tonglen, and it means taking in and sending out. And it follows the acronym of FEAR. It's a practice for dealing with our own fear and other difficult emotions. So it's just sitting with yourself, taking a few breaths, and then close your eyes and you breathe in and allow your feelings to come up, whatever it is. So you just feel it rather than avoiding it, which is normally what we do. So it's counterintuitive to feel the pain, feel whatever it is. Secondly, even more counterintuitive is to embrace it rather than push it away. It's like, oh, aversion, I don't want to deal with this. You embrace it. Then allow whatever comes up to come up, but drop the storyline. This is where the mind hooks in and starts telling that story and going in the loop. And maybe it's comfortable, it's familiar, and it's like, this is what I'm trying to work out. It's the letting go of the working out that is key. So you start to unlock this. It's just a practice. It doesn't happen overnight. It's something you can do for a minute or two a day. Just breathe, feel it, embrace it, allow it without the storyline. And then lastly, this is the most important part, is remembering all those other people who are suffering just as you are and wishing them peace and healing. And I have tried these practices, and not that I have been to war or I'm suffering from severe PTSD. I have my own traumas, and I will tell you that piece of it opened things up that like I couldn't have imagined. And I think the remembering that you're not alone, that there are so many others like you, suffering like you, looking for the same healing as you, it's a way of bringing you together with others and breaking that feeling of isolation. So the fear practice is one of the things we recommend. And then there's also a video that anyone can follow who's on the website. And winding down here, just another thing I wanted to mention is the focus on what's not wrong. And I really like the words of this neuropsychologist, Rick Hansen. He said that negative thoughts are like Velcro and positive ones are like Teflon to the human brain. And why is that? It just is. So another practice toward our healing is an understanding that we can go through this practice, learning to correct imbalances by noticing what's not wrong. And when we feel something that's really uncomfortable or painful, rather than pushing it away, it's like that thought of seeing it like a baby. Our fear, our emotions is something that need our care, and acknowledging them and caring for them rather than judging or pushing them away or just getting riled up every time. Another thing that this Mark Wolin, the psychiatrist, mentions is that, and this is key, we tend to think of our feelings, our thoughts, our beliefs as solid, fixed, and permanent. And he says this is absolutely not true. Through mindfulness, we come to see that our thinking, habits, experiences are flexible, fluid, and therefore capable of change. So that is absolutely key. And he mentions the root words of therapy, one of which is just emphasizing the word healing. And he adds that this is all about making us whole. So the intent of our project, the intent of his work as a therapist, is to restore the wholeness of being, to heal, accept the intrinsic beauty and inviolable worth of ourselves, and to share in a more fulfilled life. So we're not dissing therapy or saying, oh, don't use therapy or medication. Someone has to decide that for themselves. And part of what their self-care would be implementing the mindfulness and yoga practices, and then also what Coleman is talking about, which is writing therapy. So I'll end with our note that it is our hope that anyone's suffering from PTSD can benefit from the practices that we're sharing to heal from their trauma and to enjoy a happy life free of suffering. All right, so I can stop sharing, or at least put that site down. And Coleman, I will let you take it from there and discuss a little bit more about what you did on your side.
Well, again, I'm moving back to the Genesis because Jill gave her background about yoga. Certainly, I have never served in combat, but I am, I guess, a foster parent. And, I see the trauma from, the abuse of, parents and caregivers to the children. And one of the things I've noted in attending therapy sessions are where Jill said, and I forget the psychiatrist, she talked about the need to bring the trauma, the story to life so that a person can heal. There are many therapists out there that will say that if the child is not talking about it, to let it remain buried. Whether that's good or bad, I don't really know. And then that brings me back to, the point that during our workshop, APIS 222, one of the questions that we were asked in the class was to consider how our students and other sufferers of trauma could escape its blinding darkness and regain sight. As Jill has already noted, we are not medical experts, but we felt that our disciplines and personal interests offered ways in which individuals could gain a connection back to self. As such, it was not our intention to be medical advisors. Still, we knew that the culture of the military, as Jill has discussed, is one in which military personnel have been taught and conditioned to not open up to others regarding their weaknesses, which include letting on that the mission has gotten the best of them. And even my students in class frequently remark that they're afraid to speak up because they feel if they speak up, they will be dismissed. Since service members suffering from PTSD fear letting anyone know their situation for fear of repercussions, they isolate themselves both within their professional and personal lives, among family, friends, and the community. To address the individuals who believe that our attempts to infringe on the proper authorities when it comes to the treatment of PTSD sufferers, there was a Scottish research study in 2000 that was composed of 200 individuals diagnosed with depression. Certainly they're not looking at, let's say, trauma, but depression here. Half of the group were placed on antidepressant medications, while the others followed a plan of modern bibliotherapeutic studies. Specifically, they were reading a self-help book called Overcoming Depression, and to discuss it with psychologists. After 4 months, 42.6% of patients saw their degrees of depression reduced significantly, compared to only 24.5% of patients on medication. Also, their abilities post-therapy was handled much better than those that were on medication. As Jill has noted, the website that was sort of like the genesis, we decided to start with a website because our students are online. Online also affords everyone that wants to go to our site anonymity. No one has to know. They can just be channel surfing and they can find it. We're not the first ones to do this. When you start looking online, you can find other sites. And then that brings us back to, what makes our site different. And I said, it's the fact that, we're continually to evolve this, that this right now is, let's say, our skeletal framework, and that both Jill and I have, let's say, a vested interest in keeping this going, well into the future. As I don't have, when we're looking at, let's say, literature, we're aware of the ability of literature to affect the lives of its readers. Specifically, we're aware of the benefits of reading in general to individuals. Not only does reading improve an individual's intelligence, but it also benefits their emotional well-being and empathy by introducing them to other people and worlds. From a scientific perspective, reading reduces stress. It improves memory and cognition. When I began this project, the extent to which, how helpful literature was to, sufferers of PTSD was unknown to me. But our research has shown that when literature or reading is, and I thought this was interesting because I sort of like cross over my interest between older adults that suffer from PTSD as, being combat veterans, but also, survivors of, sexual assault, et cetera. But in one of my studies, and, J.K. O'Keen, in teaching risk factor counseling skills to medical students, house staff and students, specifically said that children who have been marginalized from literature from birth to their teenage years will later face far greater trauma than those who emerge from families where reading is a part of their upbringing. And I think that's really a significant point because, we see it, where families aren't exposed to reading. And I guess my follow-up question, and I need to do further research here, is, certainly continuous reading after a certain point will hopefully benefit those. I know as a foster parent, I ended up adopting a sibling group. Both children had been abused, and it was really tough for me, when they first came into care, facing all that they experienced, like the trauma that they faced. But even then, I just remembered constantly reading to them that, books about, let's say, mythology, books about, religious stories that kind of show them, let's say, the hope that can be found. And that's a big key about when you're doing either yoga, mindfulness, bibliotherapy, or writing therapy. There's always this idea of trying to locate the trauma, the traumatic experience, and it's a practice in therapy often is having the trauma sufferer rewrite the experience so that they no longer are being presented as the victims, that they are, let's say, emerging in some way as ones that have triumphed over a traumatic moment caused by others. The interesting thing about bibliotherapy, which means basically healing through books, the term was first coined in 1916 by Samuel McCord Crothers. But it's interesting that during World War II, doctors at the Alabama Military Hospital used books to relieve trauma for soldiers returned from combat. So specifically, even way back then, it addresses the awareness that the symptoms of trauma could be alleviated through acknowledgement, assimilation, and narration, which is what we try to do on the site. And in my skeletal version, since we were doing the site during COVID, the Mass of the Red Death is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe. It's geared more to the idea of the whole COVID situation. You have a plague happening in the story, and how people are dealing with it, and also how people are dealing with, let's say, the relevancy of, let's say, COVID in their lives. There's certainly other books, and Jill and I are, let's say, maybe combing through like what we think might be the best way to address maybe bibliotherapy on the site. Specifically, there's two variations of bibliotherapy. There's one where, as I've already mentioned, where people will read, let's say, a book, and you have psychologists, working with them, or people read it on their own. Certainly, I can't address, the psychology aspect of it, or the psychiatric aspect of a text, and helping a person overcome it, but I can show them how they can journey through the book and find hope. And one other thing is, so the students can certainly, or anyone who uses the site can certainly contact us by email, or, they can call. My number's listed there. So between the two of us, I said, I think we try to cover how one can use, let's say, their mind and body, and come to a greater awareness of themselves and overcome the stress that's in their lives. So I think that's pretty much. I know I went over my time. Is that right? Sorry.
That's all right. And as we move into discussion, Jill, you're free to stop sharing. We're just seeing the Zoom room embedded again.
All right. Great. Okay. I'm going to block it. Don't allow it. Okay.
Any questions? I see Oliver talking about his experience. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Can I speak to Dr. Ed?
Go for it.
Oh, on this site we have, I tried to put a variety of text, but, and then we went back through and let's say called it to just sort of have the presentation now, but the spiritual definitely will be covered. On sometimes, the one text that I do use is the story of Joseph from the Bible, about how he gets, his brothers basically gang up on him. So he has the trauma of realizing that his brothers don't like him all that much. He gets thrown into the cistern, then the brothers don't kill him, and then they, sell him into slavery. So there's that trauma. And then he has the trauma when he's in Egypt and gets accused of, trying to, rape the Pharaoh, but I don't think it was the Pharaoh's wife. Then he gets thrown in prison again, and then he's, so it's trauma after trauma after trauma until he finds, I say, the hopefulness of, for him, it's that faith in God. So.
And Coleman, can I interject? I want to say that a lot of the mindfulness practices are informed by Buddhism. However, the Buddhist teachers themselves are quick to say that we're not teaching Buddhism. We are not trying to, certainly not convert anybody, and it's not even religious. These are techniques for strategies for living your life, for just living life in a good way and dealing with difficulty and trauma. And it is ongoing. I mean, I've heard people say, and I believe this, that anymore being in the world, it's like every day is a practice of healing, that we all have to overcome something. There's so much anxiety today and so much difficulty that people deal with ongoing. And so I think for me, the practice of that Tonglen, of just sitting and breathing and feeling, embracing, allowing, and remembering. Until I got to the remembering part, it really wasn't having a lot of impact. But once I did that and I just started visualizing people all over the world, just like me, wanting the same things I want, happiness, peace, to belong, to matter, all of that. It's it was profound. I'm telling you, I actually cried, and I don't cry easily. So I would recommend that for anyone. I think systemic racism, it's ongoing. Systemic sexism. I mean, now we have all kind of gender oppression happening and legislation that's happening to prevent people from having rights. I mean, this upsets me so much. Political debates are just, they've escalated beyond any kind of discourse anymore. It's just so anxiety producing for many of us. And there's not an answer necessarily. So for me, it's not a cop out to do this. It's I'll just retreat to my little space and meditate. But wherever you are, you're doing the dishes, you're sitting in your car, driving, or standing in the grocery line. I just do that practice. Feel it. What is it? Embrace it, allow it, and remember. If you even do just one little cycle of that for 10 seconds, I feel like it just helps bring you back. It doesn't solve the problems of the world in any way, but at least it gives you some strategies for surviving it and staying grounded. So I'll leave you with that. I hope it's helpful. Yeah. And domestic abuse, yes. And of course, this therapy is not a substitute for making necessary changes or getting the help you need. If you are in some kind of abusive relationship, but all of this is more about personal self-care, affirming who you are, coming back to yourself, and then making good decisions within that difficulty. No easy answers. COVID, all of it. Yeah. Any other comments? I know we've been here for a half hour now, so we are respectful of everyone's time, but we just wanted to answer or address any other issues or questions you have before we go.
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for your presentation and for your work here.
Thanks.
I think that as a faculty audience, that in the classroom, and of course, like Coleman said, with our large military population, we see the manifestation of some of these things. As far as you know, a tool set, and Jenny can jump in here. We did work with some of the arts, humanities, and education leadership to present tools that we have and resources that the university has as well. We're working on getting those recordings rendered and up for you all to watch and everything. But as far as, like, you know, in crisis emergency, that there are avenues that the university has in those circumstances. So not to take away anything from what you all said, because this is really, really excellent, excellent work. But if you're thinking about that, or if you see it, just know that the university has some recourse.
Wonderful. Yes. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy weekend. All right. Take care.
Thank you to both of you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jenny.
Jen.
Bye-bye.